Well, good afternoon, everyone. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be here with you on a wet but warm spring weekend. We were long overdue. I think the golf course finally got a little traction yesterday with 140 plus rounds, but we were way overdue. I think the number of people here, and I know we're also joined online. We had a lot of people who indicated they're going to listen in. It's an indication of two things. One, just how important this project is to the course and the membership, and also just the passion that we all have for learning more about our golf course. And that's why I'm excited tonight. The more I learn about this project, and we have editorialized it for about a year, the more excited I am about what's going to happen. So I can't wait for you to hear from Brian and Don. You're going to have to put up with me for a couple of minutes before that, but I think it'll be worth it. So the agenda for the evening is pretty simple. I'll give you a little bit of background on the project, also talk about some of the finances. I'll pass it to Don, who's going to talk about some of the construction, the construction schedule. And then Brian's going to share with you his vision of not just the bunkers, but also our course. What did he see when he came here? What does he see when he comes back? And I think that's going to be a fascinating part of the presentation. And then we'll end with some Q&A to make sure everybody's fully informed. So why are we here tonight? We're really here to talk about the next phase of the long-range plan, which has always been to basically replace the sand and the drainage in the bunkers. We initially contemplated this as just a maintenance-only project, but the more we dug in, the more clear it was that more needed to be done. We interviewed during the search, I think there were 4 different architects. And they all came in and said, one of the weak links of your course, which is phenomenal, is the bunkers. So clearly there was more work to be done. And at the same time that we're taking out the sand and we're taking out the drainage, clearly it makes the most sense to address some of the issues about playability. We've talked for 20 years about the bunker faces. We can talk more about them tonight. And also some issues about placement design, which Brian will go to in greater detail. So before we get to the enjoyable part of the evening, as I said, I'm going to torture you with some issues about money and finance. So the original project cost was $600,000, kind of pre-COVID. And the project that's proposed is, yeah. I will touch on one thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's a little bit of a sidetrack. We know why we're here tonight, right? We're here to describe this $1.8 million project. But one of the things that will happen is Brian will introduce himself, and I can promise you one thing. He will downplay his pedigree, and he will downplay his reputation, as he has since I met him and everyone else met him a year ago. And I think it's important. It's hard to talk about yourself, so I'll tell you what we saw in the Grounds and Greens Committee and then other people who interviewed him. He's a lead designer and has worked under tutelage of Tom Doak for almost his whole career. And they have worked on some of the world's finest golf courses. Some in our area that you think about would be, Medina, Chicago Golf, Shore Acres, Milwaukee Country Club. But to me, and I was a complete voyeur in this process, right? The Grounds and Greens Committee did all the hard work. But to me, the most fascinating part, when Brian decided he wanted to get into business, he didn't start at a desk. He didn't start in with his architecture pencil in front of him. He decided he wanted to learn the business a different way. So he joined the grounds crew of what he thought was some of the greatest courses in the world. Those would be St. Andrews, Augusta National, Pine Valley, Marion. I mean, he has seen great, and I think we really benefit from that. And I think that's one of the perspectives he brought to the process when we interviewed him that was so appealing to the Grounds and Greens Committee when he was chosen. So we're going to go from that background to, again, talking about money again. As I said, $600,000 was the original amount that we shared with you a year ago when we presented the long-range capital plan. The current cost is $1.8 million, but the project is dramatically more extensive. What we're really talking about is the complete reconstruction and modification of every bunker on the course. I think there are 94, Don and, oh wow, I guessed right. It varies up or down a couple, but it's a very significant project, and I think it's going to be really transformational to some extent. Why did the costs go up so much? Well, as we all know, labor costs have increased dramatically, materials costs have increased dramatically. Sand is up 40%. That's not helpful to what we're trying to do. But the truth is, the majority of the cost increases have been, the scope of the project has expanded. It'll be very clear to you tonight why. We're not just going in, taking out the sand, and putting in new pipe. So the reason that this is meaningful is to remind everyone, whenever the club spends more than $400,000, we have to get approval from the membership. So tonight, and if you look at the video and you get sound, other people who are listening, it's really to better inform you when you cast your vote in the May 19th annual meeting. So we'll send out a link to the live video for those who weren't able to attend, and hopefully, if you have any questions, you've got 3.5, 4 weeks to share them with us. So my last slide, how do we pay for it? Importantly, there's not a member assessment associated with this project, which was what I initially told you a year ago. The club is in a very, very strong position financially, fortunately, and a couple of things have really enabled us to absorb the additional cost. One of which is just new membership capital inflows from initiation fees. We typically gather about $1 million a year from new member initiation fees. Last year we took in $1.4 million, which was a record. In addition, we freed up some debt capacity as a result of the tax credits that the club received. The amount that was in excess of our operating loss, the board authorized to be used for two things. One is to pay down debt, which we've done. The club has 0 debt right now, which will change once the capital maintenance project in the lower level kind of gets completed. But the second is earmark that money for the club's capital budget, which we've done. And my last point, and this is very important, and we labored hard over this, the long-term debt that the club will take on with this project and with the incremental expense is approximately the same, and we have a long-range capital maintenance model that looks out to about 2027. And the debt level at that year is about the same as it was when we initially presented the long-range plan to you a year ago at the annual meeting. So enough about the boring stuff in terms of money and finance. Now we can enjoy ourselves. I'm going to pass the mic over to Don. He's going to talk a little bit about the construction project and the timetable.
Thank you. I'll only be about, hour and a half or so, and then I'll turn over. No, I have a lot of people that will give me the hook, so this will be fairly quick. I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about this stuff. So it's great to see everybody. I had kind of hoped for a little bit of rain today, but just enough so you wouldn't feel so bad not being able to play golf. But I kind of missed it on Saturday and then again today, so I didn't want an inch and a half of rain. But it's great to see everybody here. How do I move this along here?
Just put the arrow. So let's do the right. You can do the right.
This one here?
Yep.
Okay. Here we go. So it has turned out to be a pretty nice day after all, but we're all glad you're here. But if we would have had that rain this week, this is with our old style bunkers. This is pre-2000 restoration, which is now, of course, 22 years ago. This is what we would experience. So this is a little walk down memory lane here for some of you who've been members more than 22 years. Every time we had rain, we would have this type of impact on our bunkers, and that led us to the current style that we have today. This would immediately require us to go out and work on repairing. It would, every time it rained like this, it would gradually diminish the quality of the sand. So we're quite happy that we've been with this current style we have. This is what they looked like 100 years ago, and Brian will probably be showing a few of these same photos, but the style that we have today is, of course, similar to with the grass faces. We obviously don't keep them that long like in this photo. This was probably tournament time, obviously probably the 1922 U.S. Open. So it was a little more challenging. This picture up on your right, this is old Tom Morris. I'm not going to go into who that is, but he's one of the first greenkeepers. He's U.S. British Open champion 4 times. He back when in his day things were a little bit more more like a hazard than what they are today. Obviously, he was famous for saying bunkers are not for pleasure; they're for punishment and repentance. But we're not going to go that severe. We're not going to punish. This is what we've had for the last 22 years. They've worked well for us. We don't have those washout problems, obviously, like I showed in that first picture. We've had challenges, but again, bunkers are supposed to be, they're supposed to have some kind of challenge to them. For 22 years, they've performed pretty well. Let's say 20 years. Some of them are still very good quality today, some of them not so good. So what is the life expectancy of general golf course features? This is a American Society of Golf Course Architect publication that shows all the different features. The ones we're worried about, or that we're concerned about right now, are bunker sand and bunker drainage pipe. So on this recommendation, they recommend bunker sand being replaced every 5 to 7 years and drainage pipe every 5 to 10 years. Of course, I think this is it's a little excess. But let's say double it, right? Well, we're now at like 3 times. So I think it's appropriate that we are considering this project. There's 3 general issues with our bunkers. Number 1 is the sand and drainage. Over time, we get sediment that gets into the bunkers. We get debris, natural occurrences that happen. You get winter that degrades the sand, breaks it down, makes it a little softer, a little puffier, or a little powderier. Over time, that sediment works its way down into the gravel that's enveloping the pipe, and then that kind of plugs things up. So you see those 2 bunkers there. That's just related to the fact that the sand quality is diminished. The water doesn't move through it as well with the sediment in it, and the pipe and the gravel and the pipe get filled with some sediment over time. The other really important factor that we're looking at is sand accumulation on the slopes. So these pictures were taken 9 years ago, and at that time the bunkers were 13 years old, and you can see the amount of sand accumulation that had occurred in just 13 years. The picture on the top left is number 2. Well, I have it listed here. 2 green. That's about 14 inches of sand accumulation on that bunker face. Number 6 has I didn't list it there, but that was about 12 inches of sand on that, and number 15 had like 6 and 7 inches of sand built up on those bunker faces. We cleaned all these up 13 years ago, so now we're 9 years later. I would imagine we've got a good amount of accumulation back on that. If you want to see what sand accumulation looks like, the chipping green, you can look at that next time you're out there, and it's so swollen you could fit a golf cart under that thing because of the sand that gets splashed up on that face. So it's just natural activity that occurs over time, and it builds up. That affects the slope. That affects how balls release. You can see here on number 17, the left side, or your left side, the slopes are a little sharper. The ones on the right are much more rounded, much more swollen. Fat, we call it. There's about 8 inches of accumulation on that. So. And then the third issue is grass species contamination, weedy grass species. These are quackgrass, bentgrass, tall fescue. Any of you that have lawns probably fight some of these plants. They're weeds on our bunker face. A weed is just a plant growing where it's not wanted. So bentgrass on a slope, even though we have 50 acres of it out there on our fairways and greens, bentgrass on our slopes is a weed. Quackgrass is certainly a weed pretty much anywhere, and tall fescue is also a weed pretty much anywhere. And these grasses are very aggressive. They're hard to control, and really about the only way to take care of them is spraying Roundup on them and killing them completely. You kill the root system, and then you start over, either from seed or sod. In our case, the bunkers will be sodded. So this project that we're looking at will correct all of these issues. We'll be putting in new drainage, new sand. These pictures that I show here with new sand and drainage, that's number 10 green on the right side. I could have taken this picture yesterday, and I did take it again today after the rain. No water at all in that sand in those bunkers on number 10, but there's water sitting in the bunkers on number 1, among others, one approach, many others. This will also correct, as I said, we'll be putting new sod on all these bunker faces, and so we'll be eliminating a lot of those weed issues in advance. And then the lower photo there shows the slope and how we'll clean up all that fat on those slopes. Now, Brian is going to be talking to us about other improvements that he wants to make, and that will involve perhaps some slope adjustments, some size adjustments, positioning, and alignment, and all those things that he'll get to here real shortly. So there's a lot of steps to this process. There's 3 main bodies. There's Brian. Brian will be the one doing all the shaping, or most of it. There's a construction company we're working with called Leibold Construction. They've been in business for a long time. They've worked all over the United States. They do phenomenal work. We've worked with them before. They put in our irrigation system. They did the practice putting green, helped us with the short game area. Very great people to work with. I know Brian agrees. But the way this process works is beginning in August, we need to apply the Roundup. It needs time to work before we can do any disturbance. So there will be 3 or 4 times when we make these applications. We're not going to go out and spray all the bunker faces and all the surrounding areas around them all at once. We'll do that in about a 4-step process, 3 or 4 steps. We need to let that material work, and then we can proceed with other activities. First would be sand removal. The sand is going to come out of these bunkers. We're going to take that sand, and it's going to be about, I'm going to give you some perspective on some of the quantities that we're talking about, but we're going to take about 82 semi-loads of sand out of the bunkers. That will get put in our tall grass areas. That'll make those hopefully a little bit thinner, a little drier, a little healthier. And so Leibold will push all that sand aside. They'll take it to these tall grass areas, and our staff will spread it. Then once that area dies around those areas, we'll rototill that material. We're not going to strip it and haul off that sod. That's an expense we don't need to go through. So we'll rototill all that. It'll make great material. We've done this 22 years ago. That'll all get rototilled, and then that'll get kind of pushed to the side. Brian will come in and do his magic. Some of the faces, that will have to get removed by with a sod cutter, because you can't get the rototiller on those faces. So there is a fair amount of handwork removing that sod. But then, as I said, Brian will do his shaping, the subgrade, and then the topsoil gets put back on place on top of that, and then drainage goes in. There will be about 3 miles of drainage, 15,000 feet plus. And then those drain lines get filled with gravel. That's about 35 semi-loads of gravel going in. Then the sand gets put back in place and compacted. It's about 125 semi-loads of sand going in. And then the sodded areas that we're going to be sodding the faces and the surrounding areas, we anticipate about 8 acres of material altogether. That's about the size of 4 times the fairway on number 8, just to put that in perspective. That's equivalent to 35,000 rolls of sod. So it's a lot of materials. We're going to do some fairway expansion in a few places. Some of that, majority of that, we hope to do ourselves with our own staff. We've done a lot of that in the past. Pretty comfortable with it. Some might be we might aerify and use cores and seed and do it that way. Some of it will be cedar, sliced cedar. Some of that we might try to get started earlier in the season where we don't have access issues with bunkers. So we hope to try to accomplish as much as we can with that. We're going to expand approximately 2 acres of fairways, so about the size of 8 fairway. And then here in the bottom corner, you see some of Brian's work there. Does fantastic work. We're really excited. We expect to start, like I said, August will be the first applications of some of these products. We won't really break ground until about August 16th. That's our plan. And then work will proceed all the way until we think probably November, the end of November. Hopefully we're not laying sod in snow, but if we have to, we'll do it. And our last project, I remember having to shovel snow off of bunker faces and thawing out the sod inside the shop and then taking it out and putting it in place. Believe it or not, it worked. I never had to water it. It works. It works fine. We don't expect a lot of course closures. Leibold has worked well with other clubs with this type of project. We may occasionally have to put some temporary greens out if they're working really close, or Brian's doing some shaping out in front, closer to the front of a green or something like that. We don't want anybody getting hurt, but they're comfortable with it. They work around this all the time. They're not going to stop while you're putting if we're still playing. So keep that in mind. We've got to get this going. We want to try to get it all done before winter, obviously. If we had a spring like this, the following spring, and we're trying to finish, it'd be a nightmare. We don't want that. Just be mindful, once we do have new sod out there, we'll have a fair amount of rope and stakes and signs, and it's for your own safety. You don't want to drive a cart through a rope and have a stake come up, sling up, and hit you. That kind of stuff happens. So really pay attention. And we'll be given a lot more details throughout the next several weeks before we get started here. So that's all I have. Hopefully the timing was good.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out to say hi this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been about a year now since I've been working with the club, and it's been an absolute pleasure so far. I've really enjoyed getting to know everyone on these various committees and the board, and y'all have been playing here frequently, some of you for many, many years. I don't need to tell you how lucky you are to have Don and his crew taking care of your golf course. It is always in exceptional shape every time I come here. Appreciate him. He does a great job. You're very fortunate to have him. And you've had him for a long time, so you must be treating him well. But that's really cool to see, that a relationship of decades. You don't see that very often. So congratulations to the club on keeping him around. And yeah, absolutely. A little bit about me. Thank you, Dave, for the gracious introduction. I've been in this business about 20 years. As Dave said, I began kind of post-graduation from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Decided that the way I wanted to get into this business was to work for golf course superintendents and to spend a bunch of time on the ground learning how to take care of golf courses. What goes into the daily maintenance, what can be maintained, what can't, and I was, again, fortunate to work at some great places, and I got to see just how far you can push things to make great golf. So when you wake up every morning, you mow the greens at Augusta National, you rake bunkers at Pine Valley, you kind of learn what you can get away with and what you can't, and there's a certain degree of severity and a certain degree of pushing boundaries if you want to create something great. Your architects did that here. You're very fortunate in that regard as well. For the past 20 years or so, I've worked for a company called Renaissance Golf Design, founded by my boss, Tom Doak, almost 40 years ago now. We've been really fortunate to work on some of those beautiful sites that anyone's ever had a chance to work on, and I think we've done a pretty good job with some of those, and we continue to get more work like that. But a lot of our business has been geared towards building new golf courses. At the same time, we do a lot of consulting work with some of the greater clubs in the country and across the world as well. Some locally that Dave mentioned, some in Europe, some in Australia. We've We've, again, been very fortunate to be entrusted with the care and preservation and improvement of some of the world's great courses, and that's also a fantastic learning experience. And I think has hopefully prepared me well to help you get the most out of your golf course. What makes your course special? I was really excited over a year ago to get a call from Skokie Country Club. I'd seen it for the first time probably 20 years ago. I think I've been back a few times in the intervening years before I got the call. And I've always really liked your golf course. Every time I've come back, it's been a little bit better and a little bit better through tree removal and just all of the maintenance work that Don has put into it over the years. Quite frankly, it's not the most compelling piece of land. It's relatively flat. You've got a little hill. The clubhouse sits on top of. You've got some nice water features, but topographically, as with most of the golf courses in Chicago, there's not a whole lot going on. What you do have is one of the best sets of greens in the city, which is saying a lot. Your green complexes are fantastic, and that's really the best way to build great golf on relatively quiet ground, is just build a great set of greens and provide enough space for people to find their way around and to attack certain hole locations from different angles. And it's to the club's credit that you all have done a fantastic job of preserving your greens throughout the years. You've seen a few have been changed. I think 14 and 15 to me turned out really well. But you've got a lot of original greens out there that have been around for over 100 years in some cases. So let me talk about the guys that got you to this point. 1898, one of your fellow members, a fellow named George Leslie, helped lay out 9 holes on this property. You can see here his 7th hole, right here, occupies pretty much the same space as your current 8th hole. I'd say that's the oldest hole in the golf course. It really hasn't changed all that much in the past 125 years. The 9 holes, obviously, playing across roads wasn't sustainable. So not too long after, the club hired this fella, Tom Bendelow, native Scotsman, to give you 18 holes. Bendelow was one of the most prolific architects in the early days of golf in America. Kind of one of the most important figures in golf around the turn of the century. And you were fortunate to have his advice at that time. Excuse this one being sideways. There's going to be a couple of them, and I'm going to go through a few of these plans, and I want to keep them all kind of the same orientation so you can keep your bearings. But again, he retained your current 8th hole. This right here is your 6th. Hasn't changed a whole lot. And there are a few others that are roughly in the same position as they are now. That's an example of Bendelow's bunkering. Your bunkers look a little bit different now. Thanks in large part, 1914, to this guy, Donald Ross. Maybe the greatest architect in the history of American golf. He was a Scotsman, came here relatively young, was a multi-talented person, and by all accounts, just a great individual, but created great golf courses across the country, particularly in the eastern half. You can see the names of some of his best. You're really fortunate to have his input here. This is the golf course he gave you. Again, you'll see that 8th hole really didn't change. You'll see most of the holes on this plan here are really similar to what you've got now. Your first hole comes down this way. From there, you had a 2nd hole, par 3. The property changed a little bit during this time, but you can see this part of the golf course right here, most of those holes are still intact. I think you have about 11 or 12 of Ross's original holes intact. Those are some of his bunkers. These photos were taken in the 1922 U.S. Open. Some of those bunkers are still out there, and we're going to use these photographs this fall when we're trying to put things back together. You're fortunate that you hosted a major tournament, so you've got some great photographs, both aerial photographs and photos from the ground, which I'll show you a few of that give us an idea of what the golf course was like 100 years ago. I think it's really cool that this is 100 years after the U.S. Open, too. I don't know if that was intentional, but it's a cool coincidence if it wasn't. A few more bunkers. Obviously, in 1922, you hosted a pretty big event. The golf course didn't change a whole lot from the course that Ross had laid out in 1914. The only exception here is your 17th hole. I don't know if it was the USGA that decided that hole was a little too easy. So they took Mr. Ross's green, which is a little bit shorter, and stretched it back to where it is today, which explains the walk that you now have back to the 18th tee. So that's because Mr. Ross had put the tee where it is now, and somebody shifted his green on him. We don't know if Mr. Ross was directly involved in that work. I'd have a really hard time believing that in 1922 the USG didn't consult him and the club didn't consult him. So I would, if I had to bet, I would be pretty sure that he was involved. We don't have any record of that. But nonetheless, that 17th green is not in the original location. But again, I'd be pretty sure that Mr. Ross would have had something to do with that. There's another picture during the Open. That's your 9th hole before the pond was added. 1938. The club was fortunate to acquire a little bit more land on the southern portion of the property, sold off a little bit of land on the northern end, hired this guy to make some changes to the golf course. William Langford, one of my favorites, Illinois native. I grew up in Wisconsin. When I was a young kid, my family would take my brother and I over to Lasonia Links every once in a while and play golf, and that was the first great golf course I ever saw. And anyone who's been there knows it's got some really bold features, and it's the kind of thing that gets your attention. And I grew up playing municipal public golf in Oshkosh, and trips to Lasonia were really special for me. And Langford's always been a favorite of mine. And the work he did here, I was at Indian Hill Club last time I was in town talking to the folks over there about their golf course, and it was laid out by a fellow named Harry Colt, one of the great architects of all time, an Englishman. But they also brought Mr. Ross in 1914, same year he was here. He made some improvements to Indian Hill. In 1915, they hired William Langford, I think he was 27 years old at the time, to help implement Ross's work there. So starting in 1914, 1915, Ross and Langford, I think, worked together and were friends. And it's interesting that Langford was brought back in here some 24 years after Mr. Ross did his work to update it. This is the plan that Langford gave you. You can see the north end, the homes are platted out down there. That's where you lost some land compared to Mr. Ross's routing. But the south end, which is over here, you gained this big chunk. So he changed a lot of the holes in the southern end as well. That's the layout you have today. It really hasn't changed much at all. There's a picture, you know that one. That's the 12th. That's a Langford hole. To me, one of the most interesting things is, I think because they had a working relationship really early in Mr. Langford's career, he really respected Mr. Ross. By the time that Langford was working with him, Ross was a pretty well-established designer, and he barely touched Mr. Ross's work here. The exceptions being where the land was added and lost. He didn't change Ross's holes apart from that. And I think anyone that's played Langford's work knows that he had a different style than what you see out there. And I think he actually adapted his own style to better match with Ross's style. Out of respect for him, he didn't want to change Ross's work to reflect his own preferences. I think he went the other way. So I wouldn't say that what you have is necessarily typical of Langford's work that you see at Harrison Hills or at Lasonia or other places. I think he made a concerted effort to blend his work in with what Mr. Ross had done. From the 40s until today, the course has seen some change. This one's from the 1960s. Not a whole lot had happened there, a few new trees. By the 1980s, there were a few more changes. You can see the pond on the 13th hole was added at this point, so the green end of that hole had changed. Quite a few more trees at that point, and the bunkers had been redone. So that's where your previous flash sand style was introduced, and I think that was preserved through the 2002 or 2000 renovation. That's when this guy came along, Mr. Ron Pritchard. Mr. Pritchard is probably the first architect to tell golf courses, tell clubs, you had a really neat place 100 years ago. You've screwed it up. You should put that back. A lot of people are doing that now. He's the guy that started that. So you picked a good one 20 years ago. And I think he did a really nice job here. To that point, the changes that I'm recommending are really minor. I'm sure it feels like a big deal to blow up your golf course for a few months this fall and to spend a lot of money doing it. I don't want to change your golf course. It's really, really good the way it is. And it is not in any way my intention to put my own stamp on this golf course. You've had two great architects, two of the best to ever live, design this golf course. I want to put their work back as well as I can. Number one, because they were really good. Nobody alive is a better architect than Donald Ross, so I'm not going to try and improve on what he did. Number two is, in 1914 and 1922, he was designing a golf course to suit Gene Sarazen and Bobby Jones. Quite honestly, the best players in this room hit the ball about as far as Bobby Jones and Gene Sarazen did then. So the work that was built in the 1920s still works really well for the average member in this room. There are a few of you that probably hit it 320 yards now because a lot of people do. You're not all shooting 63 every time you go out. So golf is still a hard game. I don't need to be pushing bunkers way down range. We don't need to make the golf course 7,300 yards. It's plenty hard the way it is, and it's a lot of fun. So what they built for you, I think, still functions really well. So it's not really my intention to change that. I just want to put it back together as accurately as I can because I think that your lineage, your heritage is really unique, and I think that's really valuable. That's what you look like today, thanks to Mr. Pritchard. If you look closely, it's very close to what Mr. Langford left you in 1938. So we've already touched on this a little bit. Don did a great job of explaining kind of the primary why behind this project, which started as these bunkers aren't quite working as well as they did 20 years ago for the reasons Don explained. So it's time to fix that. And again, as Dave said, when you're going to take the sand out, when you're going to take the drainage out and redo those things, that's the best, most economical time to make any other changes you might want to make. So that's why I've been retained, and that's my goal, is to improve the bunkers and better reflect the work of Mr. Ross and Mr. Langford in that process. Don did a great job of explaining the sand splash that's built up on the faces over the years. Some of you might look at the golf course and be like, well, we haven't changed the bunkers in 20 years. Why are we changing them now? They've changed without your input. That just happens. And, typically when you're playing out of a bunker, the sand splashes onto the face. More of that happens at the bottom of the slope rather than high up the face. So a slope that was like this 20 years ago is now like that. So a ball that used to land in that face would roll down to the floor 20 years ago. Now it's going to get hung up on the bottom more often than it used to. So we're going to fix that. We're going to go through the process of removing some of that sand. I just said a lot of nice things about Mr. Pritchard. I think the goal at that time, and 20 years ago, was to kind of create a hybrid between a typical Ross bunker and a typical Langford bunker. And I think you ended up with Ron Pritchard bunkers. I think it's a style that he's built at a lot of different golf courses when he's redoing Mr. Ross's work. I don't think it's really reflective of the shapes that Mr. Ross and Mr. Langford built. So, well, generally they're in the right places compared to what those old architects had done for you. I think the aesthetic is off just a little bit. We're still going to have the grass faces. They're not going to be dramatically different, but I think there's kind of a busyness and an over-shaped element that I want to just tone down a little bit so it better reflects the work of your original architects. There are a few that have been shifted around a little bit. I'm not entirely sure why, but we'll reposition, we'll reorient them so that they match the original design. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but the second point, ideally we're going to shape them in a way that lets Don and his crew take care of them more efficiently. They can get big machines closer to them. We'll try to minimize some of the handwork they're doing now. And ideally, they'll be a little easier for you all to get in and out of. Balls won't come to rest near the edges quite as often. We'll try to shape them in a way that balls are going to get to the flat part of the bunkers. They'll release off the faces, and they'll function the way they're intended to. And generally, Don's done a really good job of getting short grass very close to the leading edges of all the bunkers. That's the goal. It's a real pet peeve of mine when there's a band of thick rough that separates fairway from sand. If a ball's headed for the bunker, we want it to roll into the sand. We don't want to get hung up in rough, so we're going to make every effort to get the short grass as close as possible to the sand in all cases. And we'll reshape the bunkers in a way that will allow Don to do that. Here's a little example of how things have changed. Again, it's relatively minor. This is your 18th hole. The graphic on the top is from the 1922 plan. That's Mr. Ross's work. You can see the green bit through the middle. That's Mr. Langford's work. Really didn't change much at all. By today, you can see the pond has grown significantly. The bunkers have shifted in position a little bit. You can see the two fairway bunkers on the right side of the hole were moved closer to the tee at some point and retained in in the previous renovation. We'll push them back out to where Mr. Langford and Mr. Ross had them. The greenside bunker on the right of the green, you can see, was well removed from the green itself. It wasn't tight to the green the way it is now. We're going to change that too. There'll be a big band of fairway between the green, or kind of approach height grass between the green itself and that bunker. So minor tweaks. And these are probably a little more significant than you'll find in a lot of the holes. A lot of the holes really aren't going to change that much. There's an aerial photograph showing what I'm talking about. So the blue line represents the pond. The red lines show where your bunkers are today relative to where they were in 1922. You see things have shifted around a little bit. So we're going to put it back the way it was. Again, that's what your bunkers look like. I think Don used that photograph before. They won't be quite that shaggy. But we will stick with the same grasses you've had. The grasses that you sodded the bunkers with in the previous renovation, I think was a great choice. It's a mixture of fine fescue and bluegrass. When you use a mixture of grasses, you know, the kind of micro environment for each bunker will be self-selecting for which grass thrives. South-facing slopes might favor one of those grasses over another, but you've got a combination of grasses in there where one's really going to love where it lives. And that may not be the same on every bunker. That's okay, as long as you have healthy turf on those faces. I think that was a great choice, and we're going to do that again. And we're going to stick with the same sand you have now, too. I think that's also a great choice. It's relatively local. You know, when you watch the PGA Tour now, every week, every golf course those guys play has the same white sand. It typically comes from Ohio. It's really expensive. Tour players like it. One of the things they love about it, you know, 30 years ago, guys in the tour would show up on Monday or Tuesday, play a few rounds, get to know the golf course, and by Thursday, they'd understand how it plays. They don't do that anymore. So they want to show up on Thursday, and they want to play exactly like the golf course they played the previous week does. So they expect the same bunkers week after week. So the tour pushes that same sand in all their venues. You don't want that here. Number one, it's more than twice as expensive, 3 times as much as the sand you're going to use. Regardless of what sand we choose, there's going to be people in this club that complain about it. So that's just part of the deal. So get the cheap stuff that works really well. It's got a great color. It's not bright white. It's beautiful. It's natural looking. We're going to stick with that. I think you've got a really good sand. So we're not going to change that. That's me with my 15-year-old daughter now. She wouldn't fit in my lap anymore, my daughter Isabel. Don alluded to it. When we get into construction, I'll be out here doing the work. I'll be in the excavator. We don't draw plans. We don't trust anyone else to do it as well as I can do it myself. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll be here reshaping the bunkers myself, working with a great contractor that Don mentioned, Leibold. You're fortunate to have them. They're one of the best in the business. I've worked with them before. I look forward to working with them here. So I'm going to let them do all the heavy lifting and the grunt work, and I get to do the easy part of just making things look cool. But I'll be out there in the machines. I might have a friend helping me from time to time, but I'll be here supervising the project and doing the work myself and making sure that you end up with the project you deserve and something we can all be proud of. Not sure why I put that one in, but I guess, you know, so that's the style of the bunker we're going for. I mean, generally, again, grass faces, flattish floors. Here's some work I've done on a Donald Ross course in New Jersey. It's a little more involved there, but that's kind of what things look like in the middle of construction. You get things cleaned up, throw some sod on them. I think the photographs I'm showing you now are probably pretty representative of the bunkers we'll be building out here. Again, I don't want to build you a stereotypical Ross or Langford bunker. You know, we've got old photos of what was built on this property, and that was unique to Skokie, and that's what I want to put back. I don't want to put back some facsimile of what Ross built anywhere else. I want you to have what they built here because I think that's unique. But generally speaking, this is the style. More pictures of similar bunkers at Ross courses where I've worked. That's all I've got to say. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you very much for entrusting me to help improve your golf course. I should point out that, you know, I've talked a lot about bunkers. We've talked a lot about bunkers today. My plan goes beyond the bunkers. That's the first thing on the docket, but you know, my plan will address fairway widths, tree removal, some of which has happened over the winter and looks fantastic. I don't know if you all have been out there to see it yet, but it looks really good. Native grass areas, tees. We'll get into your tees at some point. I think the club desperately needs a few more forward tees and more thoughtful positions. So we'll be doing some of that work over the years. So we're just going to keep chipping away at things and make this golf course as good as it can be, and hopefully as fun and interesting as we can make it. So thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Feel free to fire away with any questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir.
We put in the new tee box on 9. We have obviously the same bunkering.
Did y'all hear the question? Okay. I'm going to focus on the tees more than the bunkers. I think, you've got a few holes like the 9th. That's maybe the best example. I think 13's another. 13 has 7 tee boxes. I think 9 has 6. 8? Okay. That's a lot. You all don't need your own tee box. One of the beauties of the way that these guys design golf courses was that generally they're really playable. I mean, it's not an easy golf course. You've got a severe set of greens. There are a lot of bunkers out there, but almost every green is open in the front. So if I'm trying to chase a 3-wood onto the green, I can do that, even if Dave's hitting an 8-iron. So the golf course is really playable. You don't need a bunch of tees to make it playable, which I'm not saying go back to 1 or 2 tee boxes, but you don't need 6 or 7 or 8. And par 3s, I think it's a really cool thing to have a few different angles just so it plays differently every day. But that's a little excessive. So, the cart path running between the sets of tees, I think in conjunction with reimagining the short game practice area at some point in the driving range, we're going to redo those tee boxes and just simplify that space. And we'll think about that. I think the bunkers are still going to function well, but we'll reorient the tees and reposition the tees and simplify that space in a way that the hole works really well with new tees. My pleasure. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
This is more just a curiosity, but is 94 bunkers for a course of our caliber a lot or average?
Hey, Brian, can you repeat the question for the folks online so they can't hear the audience?
Sure. Yeah, the question is 94 bunkers on a course of this age and this caliber, is that a lot? And the simple answer is that the fewer topographical features you have, if you've got a flat piece of ground, you probably need a few more bunkers to make it interesting. So if you've got a great roly-poly piece of ground with interesting contour, you probably don't have to bunker it as heavily, in spite of what a lot of architects do. You've got a pretty flat piece of ground. So it didn't offer up a bunch of interesting rolls and ridges and hollows. So you need a few more fairway bunkers, particularly, than some courses would have. So I don't think it's exciting. I mean, it's a lot, but I think it in addition to a great set of greens, a few more fairway bunkers make golf interesting on flattish ground. Oh yeah, Don pointed out that the final number after the restoration will go from 94 to 86. So a few have been added over the years. We're going to take those out. Yes, sir.
Brian, thank you. I think it's pretty provocative when you say bigger designs on the course, and I know it's preliminary, and I'd love to hear some general broad stroke ideas you have for the course, having studied it and thought about it a little bit at least.
Yeah, the question is, kind of bigger thoughts about the golf course in general. And, I'll reiterate, you guys have done a great job of taking care of this golf course. It doesn't need a whole lot of my work. It really doesn't. I think, tree removal is going to be ongoing. You've got some beautiful trees out there that a lot of people probably haven't seen in years because they're hidden by clutter trees. And, that competition doesn't do the specimen trees any favors. So we're going to take out some of the trees that I feel don't belong. We're going to try and open up some more long-range views, which, again, you'll see if you get out on the golf course again, what's happened over the winter. They're minor tweaks. I don't see anything major happening here. I think it's just making a really good thing just a little bit better. And a little more authentic to what your original architects had built. But, yeah, when I interviewed, that was kind of I didn't really have a great sales pitch. It was kind of like, you've done a great job. I don't have to do much. But that's how I feel. I think once the bunkers are done, we're going to be really close to where it should be, and we'll chip away at the tees and some trees and fairway lines and that kind of thing. But I don't think it needs major work. I think it's a great golf course the way it is. Yes, sir.
You might want to share your thoughts about the proportion of the bunkers, especially now that you
Portion of bunkering around the greens.
Yes. Yeah, the question is about the bunkering around the greens and the scale of the bunkering, which is something I've talked about in the small groups over the past few months. So we're reducing the number of bunkers by 8. The overall sand area is going to get a little bit bigger. And that's, it's interesting. When I was here when was it? Yeah, I guess it was, about this time last year, last March, I think it was. I went from here to Cedar Rapids Country Club, which is a Donald Ross golf course in Iowa that Mr. Pritchard has been kind of chipping away at restoring over the last 7 or 8 years. And some of you may have heard that a big storm went through Cedar Rapids, a derecho, and wiped out thousands of big trees and did a lot of damage. It was a horrific storm. And I saw the golf course shortly after that. And, some of the holes there had been a little more tree-lined, obviously, than they were when I saw it. And Mr. Pritchard was back in there doing some work, because when holes are framed by trees like this, on both sides, the bunkers he had built kind of fit the scale of that frame. Without the trees, the frame got a lot bigger. And all of a sudden, the scale of the bunkers looked tiny. It looked out of proportion. And when I walk your golf course now, I look at some of your fairway bunkers on the first hole, for instance, and the green is this big, and the bunkers kind of take up this much horizontal space. And that feels off to me. And in reflecting after going to Cedar Rapids, I thought, when he built the bunkers 20 years ago, there were probably trees on the outside of those bunkers. So, A, he didn't have the space, and B, the scale looked appropriate at the time. Now with the tree removal, the scale of the bunkers looks a little off to me. So we'll be expanding the kind of the horizontal visual of a lot of the greenside bunkers. Not, they're not going to double in size, but they're going to get big enough that the scale feels right now. Yes, ma'am.
With the new technology you've been talking about, will these new bunkers have a longer life than the last?
I don't, probably not significantly. I think you did a good job getting 20 years out of them. There is a lot of expensive new technology that theoretically can stretch the lifespan of your bunkers a little bit. It can also create a big mess that you have to fix in 5 or 7 years, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So I'm a little bit afraid of that. It's one of the things I love about working with Don is he always looks at the simplest solution first. The golf business isn't really like that because there are too many people trying to make money off the more expensive solution. So we're not going to take advantage of some of the newer things on the market because I'm not convinced they're any better. I just know they cost a lot more. So what we're going to do out there is very similar to what you did in the last renovation. Structurally, we're updating with some newer materials what y'all did 20 years ago. And I think, for the money you spent then and for the money you're going to spend on this project, we could double the cost of this project very easily by taking advantage of some of these newfangled improvements. I'm not convinced they're worth the money. So I hope you get another 20 or 25 years out of them. I think, the one thing that I can do is in the shaping of the bunkers, try to prevent water from running into them. That's one of the things that messes up bunkers over time is that, every time it rains, if you get excessive water running into your bunkers, the sand gets contaminated, the gravel gets contaminated, and you burn them out a little faster. But I can shape them in a way that, if water's running across a fairway, I can redirect it away from the bunkers so they're not taking on excessive water, and hopefully we can slow the aging process down a little bit. Sure. I think you first.
So the number of bunkers is being reduced, but the space is getting. The number of bunkers is being reduced, but the amount of sand is increasing. Are there any new bunkers that are being put in that aren't on the golf course right now?
Yes, there are. New may not be the right word. You've got a few bunkers that have been eliminated from the original Ross Langford design that we're going to put back. Let me scroll back to the plan. I don't know if this is going to take a while. Bear with me. These are all Don's slides.
The other thing is, a lot of two bunkers become one. So, I don't know how many places on the course, maybe 5. So that's part of the reduction.
Right, I just
But
assume you're
more
making
sand.
plus
More
the
sand
bunker
than the two
than one
bunkers.
bunker.
Yeah, there's a fair bit of that, and I don't know why that didn't happen in the previous restoration, but yeah, there are quite a few places where one big bunker has been split into 2, and we're just going to join them back together. So there's a little bit of that. We're removing some bunkers that were added and aren't original, and there are a handful that we're adding, putting back in that had disappeared over the years. but just a few. I'm trying to think of where those are. The left side of the second hole is a good example. Mr. Ross had built a cluster of 4 quirky little bunkers over on the left side there that have evolved into what you have today. We're going to put those 4 bunkers back. So that's one case where we're taking a couple bunkers and splitting it up into 4. They'll take up a little more space as well. But yeah, I don't believe. Yeah, we're adding a fairway bunker on the left side of the 11th hole that you don't have. I'm not sure. You know, it's on Mr. Langford's plan. I don't believe it shows up in the earliest aerial photograph we have, but it's up the left-hand side of the 11th hole, some 40 yards beyond the existing fairway bunker. So we're putting that one back in. So that one should frustrate the long hitters on that par 5. Yes, sir.
I have a question about playability. Our status quo right now is that you get a fair number of grass face lies. Ball doesn't release. Mm-hmm. And the slopes are still, whatever the fluffing that's gone on, the slopes are so severe, it's very difficult to take even a stance in some of those places, including not just greenside, but in fairway bunkers. And as I'm listening, I'm trying to understand how you're going to address that. And what I'm hearing, and I want to test what I'm hearing, is that you're not going to make the bunker faces, in terms of their angle, less severe. If anything, you're going to make them more severe in the name of getting the ball to release. But if it doesn't release, that playability problem of even taking a stance is going to be actually worse, not better. So let me call it a concern about the cure, because if it doesn't work, by making them even more severe, we're going to compound a playability problem as opposed to resolve it.
There's no perfect solution. I mean, that's the nature of golf. That's the nature of bunkers. Sometimes you're going to get a bad lie, but it is the goal to steepen up those slopes again, that many more bunkers or many more balls will release from the face. That you'll run into that situation far less frequently. And yeah, I'm sure occasionally, especially if you're hitting a bunker shot and you don't get it all the way up. You know, if you're hitting on the face from 180 yards away, I'm pretty confident that the ball is going to bounce and release. But if you're hitting a bunker shot, you know, a greenside bunker, for instance, and you don't get it up, you know, that's a softer landing than it would be from further away. So, you know, there's some likelihood that a ball will stay on the face. I can't help that. You know, that's gravity. So, you know, the other option is just to do this with all of them instead of this, and then you're going to have a lot more balls on the face, and you're going to lose the character of the bunkers. So, you know, I'm assuming that when the bunkers were redone 20 years ago, fewer balls were sticking on the face. That's the goal again. In my experience, I think I know what that angle is that we can get right, where it's not going to create too many problems for Don and his crews to take care of them. We're going to balance the maintainability against the playability. Yeah, it's going to happen. I'm sure. I can't eliminate that, but I think the solution that we're going to undertake is the best approach.
Brian, maybe mention your alignment. You're going to shift some alignments a little bit so they're not quite as broad.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe that helps.
So Don just asked me to touch on kind of the alignment and the positioning of the bunkers. You know, a lot of them right now, contrary to Mr. Ross's plan, and particularly Mr. Langford's, the bunkers are very perpendicular to the line of play. And the bunkers they had built are typically set in a little more of an angle, and we're going to restore those angles. So balls shouldn't be hitting the slopes squarely as often as they do now. They should be deflecting a little more off the sides, and I think that'll help that too. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, sorry, I'm asking another question. I just want to follow up on the face of these bunkers. I was always told they ended up with pockets in them, and the ball would end up in the pocket. And the reason they got the pocket was from sand getting kicked up onto them. I don't see how that changes no matter what you do to the angle or.
Yeah, I don't think, you know, over time I think that'll happen. I think with new sod, you shouldn't really have those pockets. You know, I think, yeah, over time, over 20 years of sand buildup, you know, that especially on south-facing slopes where the summer sun is beating on those faces, the grass is going to struggle a little bit. If there's 6 or 8 or 10 inches of sand underneath the turf, it's going to dry out a lot more quickly. So you're more susceptible to losing turf in those areas and those pockets developing over time as you get more sand on the faces. So in early days, we'll be, once I'm done shaping the bunkers, they'll put topsoil back on. The contractor will put topsoil back on the face. We'll sod them. So you should have very healthy turf for the foreseeable future until that cycle of buildup repeats itself.
It's okay to repair your divots too on the bunker.
Don said it's okay to repair the divots on the faces too. And don't walk up the faces. That's a no-no.
It's okay to do that.
Question coming through, just clarity on, is the course going to be closed this fall, was the question.
I don't believe so. No, generally speaking, I think through a combination of temporary greens and just hopefully being considerate of our heads as you're playing golf. No, I think the golf course will stay open in some shape or form through the project. Yes, sir.
A quick question. Sometimes when we have these massive rainstorms, we end up with water backing up, and actually that's what causes a lot of the flooding, I think, right down on some of the holes along our western edge, where actually it's not the water coming down, it's the water backing up. And I'm assuming that's something that we're thinking about and addressing.
14, I think, is probably I don't know if that's the lowest part of the property, but it's a problem there.
Is there anything that can be done to help sort of prevent that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll just take a second, Brian. So for the last couple of years, the village has been talking to us about upgrading their pipeline through the golf course. So a couple of years back, they increased the size of the drains in the streets, especially like Park Avenue and South Avenue, those streets that run east-west. And what's happened is they've increased the size of the pipes, but then when they cross the golf course, they're smaller. So the water comes down those streets, Park and South, and it rushes down, rips down there, and then it comes up out of the basins and runs across the path that's behind 17T there, and it rages around the side of the tee, and it ends up being a pond, a lake, literally, on number 14 fairway. Number 15 also has some issues with water building up over there. The village, this fall, they're ready to proceed with a project where they're going to increase the pipe size through the golf course. Now, they will connect to some of those streets that are there between Apps and Carnes, and also between just right in front of Roger's house. Those streets or those lines will be brought through the golf course with a larger pipe size. And that will run through the easement. We will have to cross the championship tee on number 17, but they'll go from a 24-inch pipe to a 48-inch pipe. So that will move a lot more water across there faster. The line behind your houses will connect to this other line right about the area to the east of number 14 green, the approach area there, and then we'll cross the fairway on 14 and cross the road and head out toward the east diversion ditch. That's the same general pathway that the pipe flows now. This will just be a much larger pipe. So the end result should be a lot less impact of water on number 14. That's been a source of delays in the past. That'll be a big help. I'm glad that this is all working together at the same time. We will coordinate going across number 14 approach at the same time that Brian's doing shaping and we're doing that work on that green. So there could be a little bit longer closure on that particular green, but they believe they can cross that area pretty quick within a few days, weeks time at the most. So it'll be a big improvement, really. So now 13, we've done a lot of drainage work over the years. We also have added what we call a pond dump valve. A year ago, we've got a system where we can open up a valve. Actually, I can do it electronically. I can do it from my phone. If I see a huge storm event coming, I can open this valve and lower our pond in advance of this rain event. So we've got a better opportunity for our pipes to work. Our pipes work great. It's just when our channel gets filled with water and the east diversion gets filled, we don't really have any way to go with the water, so there's no way around that. But if I can lower that pond in advance of those events, we've got a better chance of getting water off the golf course earlier. We were flooded Friday night. I was really surprised we were playing golf Saturday, but we did. I know it was wet out there. It's not ideal, but we could play.
Don, that's really interesting. I mean, sometimes when I'm out there in the evenings after it's flooded, I mean, even on 3 near the greens, I mean, some of those bunkers fill up
They
with
get filled
water.
with water, yes.
Right? And again, I'm just, if there, I don't know if there's anything we can do to prevent the backflow back into the bunkers. Maybe not.
I don't know. Yeah, those drain lines go to the water. When they're filled, the water backs up. Water seeks its own level. There's not a lot we can do. But it is, Brian didn't mention this, but, you know, if we were to put, I know some people really are interested in this white sand, the pro angle. We've got 15 bunkers that they'd be white the day we put them in. They'd be muddy and ugly as soon as we get the first rain event, first flood. So we'd all be disappointed really fast.
Hey, Don, I'm sorry, I apologize if you already addressed this, I came a little late, but with the issue of playability with these grass faces still being a concern, why not just eliminate them? I mean, why just not have, or have a minimal grass face?
Well, what would be the alternative? Sand?
Yeah, sand.
Okay, did you see my first picture?
No.
Let me get to it real quick.
That's what you get for coming late.
That's what we would get every time we would get a rain like we had Friday night. Saturday, you would have had every bunker looking like this out there. And that sand, my first 7 years here, I replaced some bunkers the first year I was here. I replaced the same sand 7 years later because of this. Now our bunkers, we're at 22 years. Some of them do need some new sand for sure, but there's still a lot that are functioning just pretty well.
I would have been here early, but I was too busy getting out of the sand trap.
Yeah.
And
go
flash sand
ahead.
bunkers aren't immune to plug lies in the faces. Every ball doesn't always find the floor of a flash sand bunker, right? It's nothing smooth.
And as Brian pointed out, our history shows that we had grass faces predominantly. There's a few little exceptions, right? Brian found some pictures where we have a little bit more flash in a couple places, and I'm sure Brian's looking at all that. But generally, they were grass face, and a lot longer too. I don't know if you missed the next photo, right there.
Yes, I have a question about the quantity of sand that's being removed, the sand that isn't, it's the contaminated sand. And with all those loads, where will all of that go? And how's that being used to, again, help improve the course?
It'll go into the long grass native areas. Those fescue grasses love sand. Hopefully it'll help thin those areas out a little bit. We'll use all that sand on the golf course to improve the native areas. Reuse, recycle. Yeah, it'll be used. We won't be throwing it away. Sand is at a premium right now.
This question may be for Dave. So with the long-range plan and the pamphlet we got like a year ago with all the projects that are upcoming, I know you mentioned debt doesn't seem to be much different down the road, but does this significantly change that with the price increase, or are we still on for those types of projects that we had that are important to a lot of the younger members?
No, it's a great question. It really doesn't change the pace of the plan or certainly the components of the plan. We shifted a few things around in terms of timing. For example, the exterior of the tennis hut is an example. That won't get done, or the interior of the tennis hut, sorry, the exterior will get done. But everything else is pretty much in place. And as I said, we had some beneficial financial things happen last year, shockingly to everyone. So I think we're in a very, very good position to execute everything. And the next thing after the bunkers, to remind everyone, would be the range, then the paddle hut, then potentially the project above the clubhouse. But I think everything is in order. And every time that something changes, we're trying to keep up. Because remember, 2 years ago, we were worried about not having any revenue. Last year, we had more revenue than we thought. But every time something changes in a material way, John, the board, updates the capital model to figure out, okay, how are we going to pay for it? Can we pay for it? Do we have to shift something around? So we modified a few things. For example, we added some, realistically, if we're going to do the range, however it comes to be, it's going to cost more money than we thought it was 2 years ago. Well, we took $200,000 and put it more to the range. So we're trying to keep up with those changes, but it won't be perfect. Each one will be addressed before it's really tackled. And like this project, you'll be able to vote on everything. Yes, go ahead, Stan.
Tree removal is always a very provocative topic, and as you know, we've taken hundreds of trees off the course already, and I think a lot of us kind of figured we were at the point where we were basically done, and now we have a new architect, and I'm hearing the tree management euphemism again, and just wanted to know sort of what your vision is and how far. I mean, are we on the march to the old course at St. Andrews, or is this going to stay with the kind of look we have today?
I think you're pretty close with the trees. Again, one of the goals is to showcase and really protect your best trees. So removing kind of cluttered trees around, removing non-native species. I think this time of year, or a few months ago even, is a great time to look at the forest around you, or what's left of the forest around you, and see what trees are native to this area, and focus on those trees on your property and not things that don't belong here. But you've done a great job over the past 20 years, and I think we're pretty close to the end of that process. If there have been some unhealthy trees that have been taken out and limbed up and that sort of thing. One of the first things I noticed, when you play the golf course again, behind greens, we've taken out some of the trees that are directly behind some of the greens, and to promote long-range views beyond those greens, and you're standing out at the fairway looking at the green. If you clean up the background, the green feels bigger, it feels more imposing. You're really showing off kind of the architectural elements of the golf course. And in spite of the fact that everyone carries a rangefinder now, those trees help with depth perception. And when you take them out, the golfer's on his own a little bit more and doesn't get quite as many hints. So that's one of the areas we focus on through this winter, is just taking out a few of those trees behind some of the greens to open up longer views and to take advantage of the benefits I just mentioned. But no, we're not going to clear cut this property. You've got some beautiful trees. You've got some really beautiful trees, and I want to show those off. So no, it will not look like St. Andrews, which if every golf course looked like St. Andrews, I'd be happy. But no, we're not going to do that here.
So Brian, I think that on 10 and 3, you were talking about widening fairways and bringing into sort of the visual impact of the water. Can you just talk a little bit about your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think on a site that doesn't have many natural features, you do have the ponds on the southern end of the golf course, particularly. And in the past few years, and I understand the point, you've instituted these kind of native grass wildlife areas, which I think is a great ambition. I just think the positioning and the implementation of that was off a little bit, and on those holes particularly, you've got those great ponds down there that should be an integral part of those golf holes, and they were largely hidden by some of the native grasses along the banks. So we're going to clean up some of those grasses and push the fairways closer so that those ponds actually feel like they're part of the golf hole, because those holes were routed around water features back in the day, and I know those features have changed over the years, but I really want to bring those into play and to showcase that part of the property. I think that makes the south end of the course different from the central and the northern ends, and I want those holes to stand out because of the water features. Yeah, Don says they've already made good progress this fall, and we'll expand the fairways through this project. Yes, sir.
You showed us a before and after on 18. You showed us a before and after on 18. I don't expect you to go through every single hole, but are there certain holes that you're more excited about, or the changes that, of the repositioning that you can walk us through?
The 16th is probably the one that jumps to mind. That hole's going to be significantly different. You know, it's a brute of a hole right now. It's obviously really, really long, and there's not a lot of room to run a ball onto that green. You know, there are obviously the two greenside bunkers, but then there are a pair of bunkers in the approach that, you know, force you to carry it the majority of the way to the green. So let me see if I can't find Mr. Langford's plan. Let me see if I can't zoom in here. No, but you can see 16 in the kind of the bottom left down here. That's what we're going back to. So Langford also had two prominent bunkers short of the green, but they were much closer to the tee, and they were offset a little bit. So the one on the left was closer to the tee, the one on the right they were staggered a little bit. But you didn't have to carry it nearly as far to get over those bunkers. And if you're hitting a long club like most people are, you've got more room to carry the bunker and your ball to run out before it goes over the green. So, you know, I think it's going to be a really cool look. They should be kind of big, imposing shoulders, setting up the green behind. I think it's going to be a great looking hole, and I think it's going to be a lot more interesting, a lot more manageable, really. From the tee, I think it's going to look more imposing. It's going to be more dramatic. It should be really cool. But the shot itself, in spite of looking a little more difficult, I think is going to play a bit easier for most of the members. I mean, the folks that can carry the ball into the green with no trouble now, it's not really going to change dramatically for them. But for everybody else who needs a little extra room to run the ball up, I think it's going to get easier, more fun, and going to look really cool.
So on 8, are those, I'm trying to compare with this thing. Are you pretty much going back to the bunkers on the Langford plan on 8?
Yes, essentially. Yeah, the left-hand side, you can see there's a big greenside bunker on the left-hand side that kind of runs down the hill a ways. You know, when work was done around the range at whatever point, there's a big mound there now that creeps into that space a little bit. So I don't know if we're going to tackle that now or if we'll wait until the range gets redone at some point to remove that mound and recreate space. So that may be one bunker that might have to wait until a future project to be fully correct. But yeah, the intention is to restore it to that. And you know, short right of the green, right now you have a pair of greenside bunkers on the right side. That's not original to Mr. Ross's plan. Ross had one big bunker there. Langford retained that bunker. We're going to go back to their design. And in the previous renovation, you know, I understand it was decided to stagger those two bunkers the way they are now, based on something that was seen at a great Ross course in Massachusetts called Essex County Club. To me, you've got enough great features here. You don't need to be borrowing from somebody else. You know, my goal is to put back what you had because that was unique to Skokie. You don't need to be stealing ideas from someplace in Boston to make your golf course cool. So we're going to put back what you had, not what somebody else has. That's it. Thank you all.
So just as a reminder, before I let everybody go, May 19th is the annual meeting. We'll hold a vote on the proposed bunker project, along with a couple of other issues. We will send out a link to the video, a replay, for the people obviously that couldn't make it, but also if you want to rewatch. And we'll also send something out with kind of a frequently asked question summary and then some of the issues that came up tonight. So, and if you get a chance, this is your chance to talk to Brian a little more. So thanks everyone for coming.
It is more.